when people talk about happiness or peace or fulfillment, and that you don't get it from things it's like you don't get happiness because you got married and you have kids and you have a house. You might get happy, but that's not the source of happiness. That's not where it actually comes from. It doesn't. Same with peace. You don't get peace from things. And Christianity and other religious type or spiritual type viewpoints talk in this way, sort of. I think they're trying to talk about the same thing, which is like you don't. It's like that popular trope in Christianity where it's like, well, you don't get happiness from yourself because yourself is that crappy sinner, hopeless, whatever, that whole crapshoot. But the kind of seed of the idea is, I think, similar. It's coming from the same place, which is like you don't the person that you think you are is not where you get happiness from. It's just that there's such an underlying fundamental ideology, belief system in, say, as an example, Christianity, that they don't even really slow down enough to check each presupposition and then check, kind of the bouncing ball and where this thread came from, and are we going to investigate the truth of this? They can kind of, no matter what, just say, well, Jesus, and then, so they don't really have to think about it much, or they don't think they have to think about it much. So, in my experience, that's, and I've had pretty thorough experience with that. But I think the seed of the idea is the same. It comes from the same place, which is like you don't, and that's often one of the sticking points or linchpin points where there's some fundamental misunderstanding, like between me not being Christian anymore and my Christian family and friends, which is like they don't necessarily understand what I'm talking about, or in a certain sense they understand maybe a bit of what I'm talking about, but they won't allow themselves to go to the place that we actually have in common, which is, if I'm trying anything, is the only thing I'm trying to do, which is just communicate. I guess I'm not trying to do that, but I am definitely communicating, attempting to communicate that, like, there's a very important meeting place between us in terms of what we think the core of your belief system and the core of how I see reality is, yeah, we don't get happiness from the person. We don't get happiness from food, and like we do, but it's not the source. The source isn't in the quote-unquote external world. The source isn't in perception. It's in a totally different realm, and it's more like all the things that you think you're getting happiness from are in the realm where happiness comes from. It's kind of like that. The thing where Christianity usually just kind of blindly loses it or leaps over this place where they say, well, happiness comes from God, and God is the ultimate source of all things, and they're pointing in the right direction, but they make a kind of immature mistake, a foolish mistake, when they say, well, you're not the source, you're not where happiness comes from, The person should not be the focus. The focus should be God. They make the mistake there when, if we're talking to someone who we could call a non-dualist or something, when we say, no, I agree, like happiness is not found in the person. But when we say the self is all there is, and the self is the source, and the self is God, we're not saying the person. And I don't know how many of you Christians know that and then are just continuing to paint the wrong picture of what we're saying, or how many of you, or if it's just 100% of you who aren't getting it, that on a certain level we're in complete agreement. Happiness does not come from the person. It does not come from the outside. But what you're not seeing is that the self that we're talking about is not the person. And where you stumble is that you think that God, who is outside and beyond time and space, or the source of all things that is beyond time and space, incarnated, created himself into flesh and blood Jesus, and that Jesus is outside of you, and therefore God is outside of you, and you just have to believe in the person of Jesus, and therefore God is a person, and good news, because holy shit, man, I was worried for a second there, because I couldn't quite figure this whole thing out. That's not what's going on. That's not what's going on. And the fact that you can't wrap your brain around it is not a conclusion as to that it's true. Sorry, you can't do that. You can't just make up rules, when it's clear that that's not how this works. You can't wrap your brain around it because it doesn't work. That's why you can't wrap your brain around it. It's not because, your brain is so limited in terms of how big God is. That's not what we're talking about. Those are two different things. And if you're wondering why I'm being a little salty and snarky towards my Christian friends and non-friends, it's because, I'll stop being snarky and salty once you stop judging people and acting like you know better. That's when I'll stop. But until then, but the source is not outside. And the source, and the tricky thing that we trip over, stumbling block, is, the source is the self and God is the self, but the self is not this person that I call Dan with this body. That's not what the self is. The self is not a personality, although personality and the person, the body comes from the self. But the self, when we're talking about the self in non-duality, or the direct path, we could call it, the self is the one who is hearing these words right now. And let's assume God is aware. And let's assume God is not a separate entity. Let's assume God is not limited in any way, shape, or form. And when I say God, I don't mean the God of the Old Testament. I don't believe that that's God. I don't think that's God at all. I think that's such a wacky thing that it needs to be probably contained in a different conversation altogether. I have my views on that. They don't matter, but I have my views. But it's not that the Bible is not talking about the ultimate source of everything. And I don't necessarily think Jesus was either, but who cares? So the source of the person, the source of the body, the source of anything in perception, let's say, is aware. Let's say is also not a separate entity. It's not a body that is aware, or a person that is aware, or a thing that is aware. It's not anything that you can find in perceptual experience, because consciousness is the only thing that you cannot find outside of itself. And if you investigate as thoroughly as you wish, you will find that consciousness is not limited. You can't find any limitations. You can't find boundary. You can't find shape. You can't be, and the reason why you can't, one of the reasons, is the finding of consciousness. That experience of finding consciousness is different than all of the other finding experiences that you can have. Because when you find consciousness, you find being conscious. You recognize, I am conscious. I am conscious. And then when you find that I am conscious, you have found consciousness. But it's a different experience than finding this water bottle. It's not an objective finding. It's not an objective type of thing, like objects, like things in perception. It is completely subjective, but not of a person. It's yeah. And this is the direct path piece that is missing so often in the dialogue about God and spirituality and the self, meditation, all these things, is the only important point, which is that if we're going to talk about consciousness at all and have it be worth our time, don't we want to find what consciousness is? And the wonderful thing is that we find it where we are aware. And we find that that's perhaps what we are. What you, Mike, Lisa, whatever, what you are is consciousness. And consciousness, that's the only thing you can't find like you can find all the other things. Like you can find your name, like you can find your body, like you can find anything that we could call the mind, perceptual experience, external perceptions in the world, bodily perceptions, all of these things, even feelings, thoughts, memories, the earth itself, all of this stuff is not found the way we find consciousness. It is consciousness that finds consciousness, and it is not found the same way like we find a leaf and we pick it up and we say, hey, wow, look at this leaf that's out here that's not this rock. Consciousness is found in its own seat. It's found by itself. So when consciousness finds consciousness, it doesn't find anything else. It doesn't find anything other than itself. It finds itself by itself.